All right, thank you for that, Doreen. Tumeona your roots were slightly showing. It is well, Doreen. Shine on. All right, we now move on to our first conversation for the day. Remember, we are using the hashtag #GoodMorningKenya on Twitter. Our official station handle is at KBC Channel 1. My handle is at Jain Wambui, and we welcome you to be part of this and many other issues that we're going to be talking about today. And right now, we want to focus on the education sector as a whole. In the recent past, we have been seeing a lot happening and a lot being said when it comes to our school, but that aside, let us focus on the institutions of higher learning. We are living in a time where unemployment has become a reality for so many people, and sadly so, the youth are the biggest category that have been affected with the rates of unemployment that we are seeing. But what is facilitating this whole situation? Where could the problem be lying? Today we want to focus on the curricula that is offered in most institutions of higher learning versus the labor market demands. How are they complementing each other, and how are they not complementing each other? And what are the potential solutions that lay ahead to help bring an end, or rather lessen the rates of unemployment that we are seeing, and especially so among the youth today? To help us with this conversation, with us in studio this morning, we have Mr. Alfred Cheruiyot, who is the Principal Secretary in charge of the State Department of Post-Training and Skill Development in the Ministry of Education. Good morning, sir.
Yes, good morning to you.
Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, fantastic. Let's just dive straight into it. And, starting by understanding the State Department of Post-Training and Skill Development and the Ministry of Education, what does that represent?
Okay, thank you so much. The State Department for Post-Training and Skills Development is a department which was formed specifically by government to address the growing gap between the knowledge for the students, what the students, when they graduate from institutions, there is a gap between the knowledge they have and what the industry expects from the student. So there is that growing gap which government has taken cognizance of it, and this department was formed specifically to address the issue of the skills gap.
Okay. Yeah. And looking at our country right now, we have always been talking about unemployment for so many years, and it has become a reality for so many people, and especially the youth. What is the status from what you have seen as at State Department?
Of course, there is a huge unemployment in the country. We all know that there is a problem with employment amongst the youth. And one of the contributory factors is actually the skills gap, which we talked about.
Yes.
There is an element of what is the theory the students have when they graduate, when they go to the labor market, they find there is a gap. And at the same time also, those skills they cannot translate into self-employment, because you will find those skills they've never practiced anywhere. So we are here to address that issue, that we provide the skills necessary to be able to transit from learning to earning.
Okay. Yeah. Now, I'd like to look at some of the gaps that have also been identified by so many people that I've been able to interact with. And let's start by looking at the quality of education. And this is comparing public universities and private universities. Many people say that private universities offer a higher quality of education than our public institutions. Why is this so, and how has it actually contributed to this gap in unemployment that we are seeing among the youth?
I'm not sure if that is accurate, because you find that the lecturers who are teaching in universities, private and public universities, are the same lecturers. Yeah. So the issue of quality does not arise. And I want to say, in fact, despite all the unemployment you have, the Kenyan graduates are still among the best in the world.
Yes.
So it's not actually true, even though we still aspire to have more competent graduates, but I want to say our graduates are of the required standard.
All right. Okay. So you do not agree with this narrative that private institutions offer higher quality of education than public?
I have not seen it anywhere. I've worked with those who come from public universities and private universities, and they carry similar knowledge.
All right. Yeah. Okay, now let's talk a bit about the question of brain drain, which I'd like to hear from you, and what you have seen as a State Department, because we have, over the years, brain drain has always been a problem that contributes to also the lack of skilled labor in the market versus what is actually required and what we are offering. Is that still a problem that we are seeing in this day and time?
Of course, the development of every country, every nation, it depends on the skilled labor. And when we have a situation where there's brain drain, obviously our economy will suffer. So we are addressing those things. I'm sure the government, you've seen the efforts being done by government to ensure that we retain our labor. Of course, it's a plus if our graduates are taken to other countries to work in other countries, meaning they have higher quality, but they are preferred. So we know there's that issue of unemployment, and we are doing everything possible to address so that we do not have graduates moving to other countries to work because they lack employment here in the country.
Okay. Yeah. Now, when it comes to funding for our tertiary institutions, colleges and universities, as we know it, health, education, and of course the defense are some of the ministries that actually got the biggest chunk of funding in this particular financial year. But just looking at this particular daily today, here at the back page, we have a story concerning how universities are drowning in debt as funding continues to drop. And they actually go on to say that public universities are struggling to stay afloat due to the shrinking of funding from the government, a situation that has caused so many lecturers to down their tools. That is the story that has been featured here on this particular daily. When it comes to funding, how is it a problem when it comes to our institutions of higher learning, and to what extent has it contributed to this rate of unemployment that we are seeing?
Of course, the education sector takes almost a third of the national budget. And the reason why we're having this challenge within institutions is because of the growing numbers. The exponential growth among the students enrolling in universities is moving at a higher pace as compared to the resources being allocated. So we as a ministry will find ourselves, we might be going in the region of 40% of the national budget to fund education. So that's why we are looking at ways of diversifying, moving students to other institutions like TVETs, so that we don't have everybody going for university training. Yeah.
Now, let's come back to now the courses that are offered in institutions of higher learning. We have seen so many people doing so many courses. Once they're done, they go out there. People tarmac, say, for 6-5 years because they cannot find a job within the area they have studied. Could there be a problem with the courses that are being offered in our institutions?
What is happening is, and that's why the State Department has come out strongly to insist that the institution might establish an Office of the Career Services, because you will find students enroll for courses which they hardly have information about. Now, down the line, they find the courses they took or they trained on do not lead them to meaningful employment. So that should be something we are addressing, and already a number of institutions have set up these offices for purpose of guiding the students on what courses to take.
And that brings also the question of standardizing the curricula. Is that also contributing to this, let's call them redundant courses that are being offered in some of these institutions?
First of all, let's address this issue. You know, when you go for a university, you are not going there purposely for employment, but actually it could be with knowledge. What you will do with the knowledge is up to you. If you are looking for the job and you have the right skills, so be it. If you need the knowledge so that you can be able to work in a much better way, to be able to be a good entrepreneur, that is what you require. In terms of careers or curriculum, as you are aware, the government also established a new department within the ministry to specifically for curriculum reforms. And there is being informed by the need that curricula has to be reviewed so that it suits the labor market. Yes.
All right. Okay. Now, remember, this conversation is all about understanding the current labor market versus the curricula that is offered in our institutions of higher learning. Most of us have gone through, and especially the biggest chunk of the youth that are unemployed today, have gone through the 844 system of education. What were the gaps that were there that have contributed to the current situation that we are seeing? And is CBC a potential long-term solution when it comes to alleviating this problem, when it comes to the labor market versus the skills that are imparted in our institutions of higher learning? We take a very quick break. I will be back to continue with this discussion. We welcome you to share with us your thoughts. We'll be addressing them in a bit. Stay with us. Welcome back. We are glad you are still keeping us company. And in case you are just joining us, Karibu Tena Sana. This is Good Morning Kenya. I am Jain Wambui. We appreciate those of you who have already checked in via our social media platforms. Naona mtu anajita hapo the professor. Thank you so much for tuning in. Jared Mbui, as always. Omar Hassan, thank you for being with us this morning. Richard Mohia Boro, thank you for tuning in. We have CK Ikiha, I hope I've pronounced that right. Thank you for being with us, as well as Kiplagat Kitur. We appreciate you for being with us this fine Monday morning. We welcome you to be part of this conversation. Remember, we are focusing on our education sector as a whole and just trying to understand why the curricula and the labor market are not working together as we hope they would, and what are the potential solutions that we can bring into play to help bring down this lack of mismatch that we are seeing, and consequently bring down the rates of unemployment. With us in studio once again is Alfred Cheruiyot, who's the Principal Secretary in charge of the State Department for Post-Training and Skill Development under the Ministry of Education. Thank you so much for continuing to be with us, sir. Now, we pick up from where we left up and still are focusing on our institutions of higher learning, and the question of resources and infrastructure comes into play. How is this a contributing factor to this mismatch that we are seeing?
The resources actually would inform the quality of every service you are providing.
Yes.
Whereas when there is a shortage of resources, probably everything will be strained. And I want to say again, because of the sheer numbers, you will find that the resources can never be enough. It will always be a shortage of resources. But the government is doing everything possible. You know, you've injected a lot of resources to ensure that the sector does not suffer. We get the resources, additional funding. We had the other day, the government is putting up construction of extra classrooms to accommodate the students.
Yes.
So the government actually is doing everything possible to ensure that all resources are availed for our children to be able to learn and get the right knowledge.
All right. And also comes in, and looking still at the aspect of resources, comes in the lecturers that are mostly in these institutions of higher learning. We have seen so many times most of them going on strike, which is actually one of the reasons that have actually been put here on the dailies. The fact that they are not also feeling appreciated or paid enough in order to undertake the responsibilities that is placed on them. What are your thoughts on that?
I want to say about salaries that nobody gets enough salary. I'm sure even you, Jain, you'll always want more salary.
Yes.
So that is a labor issue which we are between the institutions and the lecturers. It's something I cannot discuss because I don't have the details and how might they earning, how might they expect to earn. But all I know is that nobody in the world has been given sufficient salary.
No one in the world has been given sufficient salary.
Nobody.
All right. Now, let's flip the point of conversation, focus on now the students in these institutions of higher learning. We have seen for a long time that the younger population have a certain perception around TVET institutions and the courses that are offered there. Is this also one of the reasons that has contributed to this mismatch that we are seeing in the current market?
The TVET institutions or the tertiary institutions, those ones, the mid-level institutions actually, should be, that is where you expect the best skills. But this perception that you must have a degree, when in fact you would go to a TVET institution and get more skills, you would earn you more revenue or earning more money, but you will find everybody goes for a degree when in fact could do well in a TVET institution. Yes.
And that is a problem that needs to also be addressed when you look at the youth.
Yes.
All right.
That is one of the problems we have, but we've been doing everything possible to discuss with the youth, to show them there is a path. Even when you go to a TVET institution, you still land at the university level.
You still go at the university. And also when it comes to, I know you had touched a bit about this, when looking at the infrastructures themselves in terms of funding in order to ensure that we have more institutions across the country to accommodate the students where they are. Is this something that is also, you know, one of the drivers as to this mismatch that we are seeing? And especially looking at the mashinani areas.
I wouldn't attribute it to classrooms as such, but maybe we need to work closely with the industry to understand what are the expectations of the industry, because we could be busy in the ministry providing education, but when the graduates come out, they find what the skill set they have does not match the needs of the industry.
Yes.
And that is something that is why we are intending to have a conference where with all the stakeholders, we expect the governments, private sector, development partners to be able to, we meet and we discuss then we'll be able to understand where the mismatch comes from.
All right. Yeah. And speaking of this conference, it will be running from the 7th through to the 9th. And the theme of the conference is Enhancing Graduate Employability. How practical is this going to be, looking at this 3-day engagement that will be happening?
We have to start from somewhere. First of all, as government and as ministry, we have got to understand what do we need to do with our curriculum so that when the graduates come out, they can fit in the labor market quite seamlessly. And that is why we have to start from that point. We have to listen to industry, what they expect. You realize also the traditional jobs. Probably the current curricula addresses the traditional job.
Yes.
But the labor market, now the opportunities are different. And that is where the mismatch now comes in, because you'll find probably, let's use some of an accountant, the ledger or whatever. I don't know, in the new market, what do you do? Do you still work the same way or just change?
All right.
And those are the issues we want to hear from the partners and the private sector.
And what is the relationship like, looking at this public-private partnerships, looking at the education sector? Because again, borrowing from this particular piece here, it goes on to say that there has been a debate on whether the government should stop funding students placed in private universities, arguing that this is veering off the focus that was initially there when it comes to government and public universities. How is the relationship, looking at the stakeholders that come into play?
Of course, we have private investors who have put up institutions which is actually assisting the government a lot. And that student who is learning in a private university is a Kenyan student. That student merits scholarship,
yes,
like funding by government, just like any other student. So I think what the government is doing is just to send students to those universities with an agreement with the university. But it doesn't mean we should never fund a student who is learning undertaking a course in a private university. Yes. And
what do you make of these critics who argue that we shouldn't have introduced a whole new curriculum? Looking at the CBC curriculum, we should have just relooked at the 844, given it hasn't really had reforms made over the years since when it was instituted over 35 years ago. We should have looked at those gaps that were there, as opposed to bringing a whole new curriculum into place. And they want us to revert back to 844.
What I want to say about education is not a competition. No student is taken to school to fail. And the issue of grading students, that this one has passed better than the other one, should not arise.
Yes.
Why should we give a certificate anyway, if that certificate does not have any meaning? What CBC is doing is that everybody must qualify. Now, what is the difference here is one will be faster in understanding, getting the skill set. The other one will be moving much slower, but eventually will also qualify. That is why when you go even a driving school, it doesn't mean you become first-class driver, another one second class, that kind of thing. You have to be competent enough to be able to perform the job. And that is what CBC is geared towards.
All right.
Yeah.
And looking at the digitization aspect, we are moving in a time where everything is shifting to the technological space. I mean, the pandemic moved so many people from the traditional offices or the traditional way of doing things onto the online platform. How is this going to be factored in during this conference that will be happening to ensure that it's part of the changes, the reforms that are coming to ensure that mismatch is no longer an issue that we are dealing with?
Of course, the pandemic brought a new reality, and we have to also respond to it. That's why we have to look at curricular reforms so that we understand now that students may not necessarily sit in a classroom, but they could be sitting at home. But we have to look at how does it affect the students. Was the whole idea of bringing a child to a school, was it only about to learn or to acquire the knowledge from the books, or the other skill set a student would acquire by interacting with others? Okay. So we have to look at all those things. How does this new reality affects the education sector? And we have to hear from the private sector also how it affects them. Do we train the student to be able to work virtually? Do they also accept to have people working virtually? What do we do? Okay. So those are the many questions we'll want to get when I hope you'll be at the conference to be able to get much more about this.
We hope to be there.
Yes.
But now looking at the employer who is at the end of this particular chain, they also want value for their money. And they are dealing with the same breed that, looking at the 844, the biggest chunk is those who are already out. They are now with that population, but they also want value for their money. How can they be brought into this whole conversation as part of the value chain to ensure a better future, even for those that are not yet there?
Yes, that is why we have this Department of Post-Training and Skills Development to address the gap between the existing graduates the ones you are describing, the ones who are the 844 chunk.
Yes.
Who have skill sets which do not necessarily meet the market needs. Probably the expectation of the industry varies from what they possess. So we are here as to also to close that gap, taking them through trainings, short-term courses to be able to convert them to somebody who can work seamlessly, join the labor market seamlessly.
Okay.
Yeah.
But we're also having those that are already in the labor market, but they are experiencing what we call underemployment because of being in the same level of education over the years, doing the same job in the same market, and yet the market is evolving. Are they also part of who you are looking to address when it comes to this mismatch that we're also seeing already in the labor market?
Of course, someone getting underemployed is because actually of the lack of skills. Because you will find somebody who will have to compromise and probably take up a much lower grade employment. And it's because of the skill set. But any competent person can never be underemployed. That one I can confirm.
Any competent person can never be underemployed.
Yes.
And what responsibility do you now, as an individual, as Mr. Alfred Cheruiyot, place on those that are already in the labor market when it comes to sharpening and improving their own skills to better their opportunities when it comes to the competition out there in the market?
Yes, of course, labor market changes. The needs of the industry changes from then. And for one to remain relevant, you have to skill and reskill and train all the time to be able to move with the changing trends in the labor market. Yes.
All right. Now, as we bring this conversation to a close, maybe just looking at those that have a role to play in this whole conversation, looking at this mismatch and, of course, the labor market, what efforts can they bring onto the table? And maybe you can even tell us some of those stakeholders that you find vital to this conversation when bringing our hands together, bringing our efforts together to ensure that we are moving forward together and not leaving one part of the value chain behind.
We're working well with the industry. That one we have labor, the Department of Labor. We are working with the private sector, the Chuakali Association. By the way, Chuakali Association, to many people, the perception is different. But I want to confirm to you that we have very many skilled people in that sector who have very good innovation skills, and they drive the economy. So it's a very vital sector. We work together. We work the KBC, Kenya Private Sector Association. We have with all these organizations, we work together to ensure that what we are doing is relevant to their needs.
All right.
Yeah.
And what of the responsibilities that has been placed on both the national government and the county governments?
Of course, education belongs to the national government, but there are those roles which are performed by the county government, like the early learning, the early learning that is ECD. You will find thousands are domiciled in counties. But eventually, once they move from ECD, they join a primary level now, which becomes now a national entity. Yeah.
All right. So by the time this conference comes to an end, what should we expect as a population moving forward in line with this whole mismatch that we are seeing in terms of the solutions that we are hoping to get?
Yes, we are looking at the solutions. But the solutions we have already, are they the right solutions? That is why we have to have this conference, so that as we work on the solutions, we know these are solutions which will address the skills mismatch. As we come up with short-term training, skilled, tailored programs, are they going to address the needs of that young person to be able to be employable?
And how can the common Mwananchi be part of this whole conversation in line with their individual experiences, saying, I went to school, I studied this, we did not have this particular infrastructure, we were only taught this by the books, but when I got there, I found a camera. I had never seen a camera before. How can they channel such concerns to ensure that as a State Department, you are able to take note and offer a solution moving forward? Yes,
we work with the private sector to be able to expose them to those equipments. If they have never seen it before, we should be able to expose them, taking them through short-term programs. To probably would call it something similar to an internship, to be able to get exposed to these equipments. If it's a camera, should be able to handle it. If it's particular equipment, to be able to know how to operate it, so that once they get out to the labor market, not only that, they have not only studied, but they have already experienced it.
All right. Yeah. And channels for public participation in line with this conference?
Yes. Public participation, this conference is open to the public, but we know everybody, but we have put also, we can follow it virtually.
Yes.
So we have made all those possible so that everybody can participate. we know also the issue of social distancing and rest. So we encourage members to be able to, those who want to follow, they can follow through the virtual means and many other live programs.
All right.
Okay.
And as we close, maybe what is your call to action message, generally speaking, looking at your department when it comes to training and skill development as a whole?
Post-training and skills development, I want to ask members of the public to know that this department addressing the skills gap between the youth graduating from an institution and the needs of the labor market. And we are working on countrywide programs to be able to address the needs. We'll be going down to counties to be able to address in those areas, because we know everybody cannot be here in Nairobi, but we have to move across the country to ensure that we roll programs which help the youth to be employable.
All right. Okay. Now, as we get to bring this conversation to a close, there's some feedback that I was able to get yesterday from a few colleagues that I reached out to in line with this discussion. Let me just pull them out very briefly, and maybe you could just tell us what you make of this when it comes to the mismatch that we are seeing there. And one issue that was brought up, and this was a student who was in university, and they say that the absence of student loans is a problem that has brought about this mismatch that we are seeing. Is this something that you can say is a valid concern?
I don't know the knowledge in the student loan, how it's related. Probably in terms of the student loan
being facilitated to go through the training is what is the problem, the lacking those loans.
I cannot confirm that is the situation, but you may find that student A is lacking the skills, student B has the skills.
Okay.
So, and probably both of them will access similar loans. So it's not something actually can attribute to the minimum amount they're given.
All right. Yeah. Another issue that they brought up was frequent student unrest, which consequently disrupt the curriculum, which consequently makes them lag behind in line with the demands of the labor market.
Okay, history has told us that the student unrest is informed by pressure, especially when the exams are nearing. We expect this unrest in schools, and this is due to tension. You've seen schools being banned. And it's not something new. We've had it over time. Students banning schools. It's just probably to release some kind of pressure. But you cannot say it is due to a particular issue. But probably it's a human behavior. They want to find ways of finding their energy and all that. All
right. Yeah. And finally, one last one that came up, and this is particularly from someone who was, I will not mention the institution, but they just recently graduated. They say denied opportunities because they do not have the experiences that the labor demands that they have when they're coming out of school.
Yes, the institutions... of course, if private institution would want somebody who can produce immediately on employment.
Yes.
But within government, we cannot discriminate along those lines. But for private institutions, everybody is encouraged to take up as a deserving employee and train accordingly.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Now, this is the conference that will be happening from the 7th up until the 9th of December, just addressing the mismatch that is there when it comes to the curricula and the demands of the labor market, seeing how these two can be brought closer together to ensure that we bring down the rates of unemployment that we are seeing, and especially so among the youths who are aged between 20 and 29. Looking at that age gap there, they are the ones that are heavily affected with high unemployment rates. We have been speaking with Mr. Alfred Cheruiyot. He is the Principal Secretary in charge of the State Department for Post-Training and Skill Development in the Ministry of Education. Thank you so much, sir, for being with us today.
Thank you. Thank you.
We appreciate the time.
All right. Thank you.
All right. We appreciate for the feedback that you've sent through, but we are not yet done with Good Morning Kenya. Do stay with us. More after this break.
Okay.